Hi everyone, I'm planning to make a series of videos on how to use Azure Machine Learning Service for training your models as well as deploy them for inference. Okay, as part of this, in this video, I'm going to show you how to deploy an Azure Machine Learning Service, and then quickly walk you through, the basic setup here. Okay, so the Azure Machine Learning Service, right? So it depends on four other Azure services. Okay, the first one is the Azure Storage Account. You need the Azure Storage Account to store your notebook files, as well as if you don't configure any other storage account, by default any data that you upload goes into this storage account. Okay, the other service is the Azure Container Registry. So this is where you can store your Docker images. So the Docker images are either going to be built by your code, or you can the Azure Machine Learning Service also builds certain images indirectly without your notice behind the scenes. Okay, and we also have the Azure Key Vault service. This is where you can store your secrets that you use to maybe connect to external services. Okay, and then finally you have the Azure Application Insights, which can be used to store your telemetry data, right? So your metrics, application logs can be sent to the Azure Application Insights for monitoring or even troubleshooting your jobs. Okay, so to deploy this Azure Machine Learning Service, right? So what I did was I'm using Bicep to deploy these resources. Okay, since as I said, right, so you need four other services. So I have the storage account resource, the Bicep code shown here, right? So I'm going to use the general purpose v2 storage account. That's the only thing that you can use here, right? So without any hierarchical namespace, because the hierarchical namespace enabled storage accounts are not supported within Azure Machine Learning Service by default. If you want to use it, you can still attach a hierarchical name in a namespace enabled storage account to your Azure Machine Learning Service. Okay, but by default it needs just the the general purpose v2 storage account. Okay, I'm using the the locally redundant storage, and then with hot access tier, right? So the resources that I'm deploying, right? So they're all publicly accessible. Usually you don't do this in the enterprise, but just for this demo, I'm showing you. I'm just using the publicly accessible services. Okay, otherwise you have to create your virtual networks. You need to create private endpoints. You need to disable the public network access. Okay, so that's the storage account. Then there's Key Vault, right? I'm using a standard tier here with soft delete enabled. Okay, and then I have the container registry. I'm using the basic tier. Again, right, so I'm using the public network access as true, and I like enable public network access. And then finally the application insights resource. So the application insights resource need a log analytics workspace. Okay, so which I've included here, the log analytics workspace ID. And if you go into the log analytics workspace module, right, so I have the the log analytics workspace resource defined here. Okay, and then the Azure Machine Learning Workspace module, right? So basically I'm using the Machine Learning Services Microsoft.Machine Learning Services resource provider, the workspace resource. Okay, this particular API version here, right? And then I'm configuring all the dependencies in the properties, right? So I have the storage account, Key Vault, application insights, and container registry ID with again public network access enabled. Okay, so I created this main.bicep file here, right? So basically I have a list of parameters, right? And then I have the variables defined. All of these resources would have a suffix. We can use a Unix string as well if needed. I'm importing this module, the storage account module, to deploy the storage account resource, the key vault resource, log analytics workspace, application insights, container registry, and finally I'm using the Azure Machine Learning Workspace module here, right, to deploy the Azure Machine Learning Service. Okay, so if you go to the Azure Machine Learning Service again, right, so I've also said, system assign manage identity, right, um, you know, so basically I'm using the system assign manager here. When we create the service, right, so that would be created, and then in the role assignment section, right, so I'm giving this particular identity access to use the key vault. So I'm using the key vault secrets user role, storage, blob data contributor role, right? So, and then even for the Azure Container Registry, I'm giving the ACR pull, I'm assigning the ACR pull permissions, all of these assignments are at the resource group, level. Okay, so all of, I referenced that here in the main.bicep script, passing the key vault ID, storage account ID, container registry ID, AML workspace principal ID, right, which is the output, the principal ID is the output from the AML workspace. I'm just configuring it here, right, and then I have the parameters file. I'm going to name this workspace as AML tutorial. I'm going to deploy this in the central US region. Okay, so Visual Studio Code has the Bicep extension, which you can use to develop. It has like good intelligence, which you can use to develop these Bicep scripts, and you can also use the UI for to deploy, validate your Bicep scripts, or even run the what if analysis. Okay, I mean you can also do this via the Azure CLI commands as well, which you can use it in your CI/CD, right? So within CI/CD, you can use the Azure CLI commands as well to run these Bicep scripts. Okay, so let me go back to my Azure portal, right? So I have the Azure subscription here created, and then if you look at the resource providers, right, usually when you deploy these Bicep scripts, so some of the resource providers would be registered automatically, right, again depending on your access. And again, just ensure that whenever you're deploying these services, right, so the associated resource providers are registered within the subscription, right. This is for the machine learning, and then you have one for the storage and one for the container registry, right. So all of these are resource providers. Just to ensure that they're part of your subscription, right. And then I have the resource group created here. Okay, so this is an empty resource group, right. So then let me show you the other thing, right. So basically this is the documentation. I'm currently using the Bicep, but you can also use ARM templates or even Terraform to deploy these machine learning services, the workspace resource. Okay, again I'm using the system assigned identity. There's a lot of properties that you can configure here. Okay, right. So one thing that I just want to highlight is basically the Azure Machine Learning Services, there used to be, V1 APIs. The APIs here is what I'm referring to, the SDKs, the Azure Machine Learning SDKs, and, the CLI. I think maybe a couple of years ago, they released these V2 APIs. So basically with V1 APIs, only the workspace and compute CRUD operations, uses the public ARM. Everything else used to be inside the workspace virtual network. But with V2, all the operations, right, even the compute creation, like data store creation, job creation, environment, and all of those operations, right, goes through the public ARM. When we say public ARM, right, so only the metadata, right, related to your operation goes over the internet, right, goes through the public ARM, right, not the actual data. Okay. there is a way to make sure that you can only use v1. So there's a v1 legacy mode parameter that you can also pass during your deployment. If you don't want to use the public arm. Okay. Basically, you only need to enable this parameter if you are using a private endpoint with the workspace and don't want to allow operations with or public networks. Okay, so let me go back to Visual Studio Code. Let me I'm not going to validate and run any analysis, any what if analysis here, right? So let me go back to so I have this command az deployment group create. Let me type in my resource group name, rgkctaml tutorial, rgkctaml tutorial. Okay, I'm passing in the main.bicep script and then the parameter file here. Okay, so let me run this. Again, you can validate without running, but I've already did the validation here, right? So it started running, right? So few minutes to deploy all the services. Okay, so this ran fine. Okay, so let me maximize this. Basically it deploy all the resources without any errors. Let's go to the Azure portal, and then let's go to the deployments here, right? As you can see, right, so all the deployments are successful, right? So if you go to the resource group, so basically all you can see the Azure Machine Learning Workspace resource, container registry, application insights, key vault, log analytics workspace, and storage account created. So let's open the Azure Machine Learning Workspace, right? So as you can see, right, so the storage account, the container registry, the key vault, application insights are all part of this particular service. Okay. Azure Machine Learning Service can also also comes with a MLflow tracking server, and I'll cover more on this in the later videos. Okay, like how to use MLflow APIs and then connect to this MLflow tracking server. Okay, but I think this is what we have, right? So and then if you go to the networking section, right, as I said, right, so this is all publicly enabled, publicly accessible Azure ML workspace. Okay, I'm not creating any private endpoint connections. Okay, but you can configure all of that. So let's also check the role assignments, right? So basically we have applied the role assignments for the system assigned manager entity, right? So for that, right, so let's go to the resource group again. Let's go to the access control, and then if you go to the check access, right, so this is for the system assigned manager entity, right? And then if you select the Azure Machine Learning Service, so you see all the role assignments that we defined in the Bicep scripts, right, were all applied here. All right, so in this video, so what we did was we were able to deploy the Azure Machine Learning Service and the associated services successfully, right? In my future videos, right, I'm going to go into more details and walk you through the various features available within the Azure Machine Learning Service.